It's a real test of nerve. And Putin at the moment, while he's got his friend in the White House, thinks that he can push on. But how long for? I only give it a few months. I think we are coming to a decision point this summer.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Jabot. And this time we are joined by defence editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Robert has been a broadcaster and journalist for 55 years. He's a columnist for The Eye and reported from conflicts including the Falklands, the First Gulf War and the Balkans. And he writes regularly on the war in Ukraine. Robert Fox, great to see you again on Frontline. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
The Coalition of the Willing is meeting in Paris today, ahead of which President Zelensky told journalists he hoped the US will stand strong. Now, that's a reference to Russian demands to lift sanctions before it implements this ceasefire that's been agreed in principle in the Black Sea this week. The US is considering these demands. Its decision will have a huge impact, won't it?
Yes, it will. And I think that this is where there is increasing difference of opinion between Europe and America. Yes, that's been obvious, a different approach, a different doctrine, a different a preoccupation. But it's quite clear that the aim is different. I think whatever there is in the Coalition of the Willing, and let's not talk about armed forces at the moment, they see something different about Ukraine now from America. And it's simply this. They have to draw the line at Ukraine because they see a warlike Russia whose economy, as well as its government, is dedicated to being a military regime at the moment, and the threat that that poses to not only Eastern Europe, but to Western Europe. America wants a deal. This is curiously where it's not naive to say the art of the deal. Trump wants to cut a deal with Putin because that's his get out of jail card. It's not only his longed for recognition for a Nobel Peace Prize. Has he ever really seriously looked at a Nobel Peace Prize jury? They won't go near him on this, I predict. But he also wants the deal because he thinks that this will somehow save America. He's going about it all in a very odd way, but America, like most of the developed world, is saddled with huge debt.
And just on those preconditions that Russia has set for joining in with this ceasefire in the Black Sea, it says it wants its banks reconnected to the SWIFT payment system, sanctions lifted on food and fertilizer exports, and its idea of stopping strikes on energy infrastructure stops short of civilian infrastructure. So it could, in theory, still target railways and hospitals in Ukraine. I mean, their negotiating position is very clear, isn't it? Give nothing, take everything.
No, the war goes on too. I think that they want the summer campaign, look at the configuration of their forces on the ground. It's quite interesting, the whole business of infrastructure and energy. We have to come onto the banks because that's vital. That's very close to the heart and the very, very large business portfolio of Vladimir Putin. And there's a particular detail in that which has to be looked at. Park the banks at the moment. But it looks as if Ukraine has an edge. It's suffering very badly on the ground, but has an edge in that it is striking logistics. It has a capability of deeper strike at refueling, at formation points, at the deep backup area, the deep logistics area for this, what is now this enormous effort with the special military operation, to which about 650,000 personnel, mostly military, but some civilian, are now committed. Huge strain on the Russian economy, about 420,000 in and around the operational area per se. So I think it's a real test of nerve. And Putin at the moment, while he's got his friend in the White House, thinks that he can push on. But how long for? I only give it a few months. I think we are coming to a decision point this summer.
Interesting, though. I know you write their relationship as a bromance, don't you? Even if Donald Trump does want to fulfill those demands made by Putin to enter into the ceasefire deal. The EU has its own set of sanctions covering these areas and says it won't lift them until Russia fully withdraws from Ukraine. Where does this leave things? Collision course with Europe?
I think there will be. There are increasing doubts, but the problem is the terminology in which the inner court of Trump really deals with these things. And we got a very, very good flavor in the Goldberg WhatsApp signal link, rather the social platform. The chat room was Signal, not WhatsApp. I should make that absolutely clear. But the fact that Jeff Goldberg of The Atlantic was there and actually have blown the cover, because it's, as Janet Daly said in the Telegraph, sorry to quote a rival, but remarkable piece by her, given how pro-America she is, wrote a very strong piece. And remember, she's Canadian by birth, I believe, that she said, America has lost its moral leadership of the Western world, and it's absolutely clear. And there's a thing, and she's the first really to emphasize this, she talks about the puerile language. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, and nobody has really the guts to say it except perhaps people like Macron, is the infantilizing of geopolitics by the Trump regime this time round.
Yeah, how much damage do you actually think this has done, that this extraordinary sharing of information by his top team on this messaging app Signal with the journalists, as you mentioned? I mean, the details of the Houthi attack and the derisory attitudes towards European freeloaders, pathetic, I think they were called as well. I mean, how much damage do you think that has done to the US's standing as an ally?
Well, it's made everybody very wary, and so it should do, because first of all, as Jeff Goldberg himself in a follow-up, there was a breach of OPSEC, of operational security and secrecy. They did give details away. They were blabbing away hours before the attack about target sets, munitions, ops and debts, acts and debts, that's attachments and detachments, what kind of forces were involved, and timings. Now, you can't get out of that. They've tried to argue their way out of it, Trump calling it a glitch. That has shown, I think, something really serious. What is really serious is, again, as they said about Watergate, it's not the thing itself almost as much as the cover-up. And the covering the tracks afterwards has been just truly awful, and particularly when you get such silly things. I shouldn't use such language, perhaps, but a silly thing, like the J.D. Vance family going off to Greenland as a stunt and it was almost done to divert it. It's very interesting within the British establishment, such brief interludes I get of encounter with it, military and civil, and it's split. And I've written about this, by the way. Sorry I don't want to trumpet my own perpendicular pronoun, I.
It's fine, don't worry.
I have written about this, and there's two schools of thought. There are the Atlanticists, this will blow over. We've only got about 20 or 22 months of full overdrive Trumpism, because the midterm elections will come along, all things will change, things will go back to normal. This is UK particularly, far too integrated with nuclear forces and intelligence. We can't go back. I even got a dose more of that yesterday with a close encounter with the Defense Secretary and senior military staff. I don't think it's true. History doesn't go backwards. It doesn't reverse itself. Time may be able to go backwards in the view of the quantumist physics, but the narrative of history will not go back on this one. And I think that particularly for a country like the UK, France, Germany are really in the eye of the storm, because they really have to decide what to do. And what they have decided is this: a very shrewd observer and former military commander who sits in Brussels, so you can work out who he is, absolutely observed this and said, it is clear that European NATO, the EU defence and security setup, and all supporters have decided to draw the line in Ukraine. They are not going to allow Russian occupation. I don't think the Americans realize that, and that's why they're scrambling together to get assets, to get command structures that can move those assets and get forces into place. They won't do it in a hurry. I think they've learned their lesson. They're not going to do it by pre-announcement, but it is really going to happen. And this is going to happen over sounds strange to have said that they've got to draw the line, that it's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 years. They've got to hold the line there, and that's what they know. And I think a lot of behind the scenes, which is not going to be very difficult to report. This is what the discussion is going to be. I'm sure it's really what the discussion is in Paris today. It's not about a peace force, because they know that the peace forces are gone guzzling. It's not going to happen in the terms describe it, but it will be very much behind the scenes at now the critical NATO summit in The Hague at the end of June.
When you say that European allies have decided to draw the line in Ukraine, just want to get your perspective on something that was said, interestingly, by Steve Witkoff recently in his interview with Tucker Carlson. He repeated Russian disinformation about the occupied land in Ukraine, saying that referenda had been held, which proves the people want to be part of Russia. And he sort of put the idea forward. The question is whether the rest of the world will accept that. The implication is that he may well do. If the US does try to force President Zelensky to hand over the entirety of those 4 oblasts to Russia, will he be supported, do you think, to resist, as we expect he will do, obviously, by his international allies, by Europe?
In what way do you think that he will be supported? I thought that the language, again, of Witkoff in the Carlson confessional, really, that's what it was, do you remember he was talking about the referenda in 4 oblasts, and he couldn't remember the name of 2 of them?
Of course, yeah.
One of them, let's note this, one of them he called Lugansk, not Luhansk, and that's the way Russia calls it. So somebody in the Witkoff office is just reading the Russian script, and this is extremely, well, it's not extremely concerning, because we know whereof he comes. He is a property developer. He's a big golfing buddy of Trump. And I think the thing that's going to catch them out is that their lack of attention to detail. Yes, the Europeans are slow. They are confused in their councils, because how on earth are we going to hold NATO and the EU together with the presence of countries like Hungary and those that might follow them? Not too many, I think, by the way. But I think that it is a wake-up call for Europe. And this, all the stuff about having to spend more on defence, we had heard it from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Actually, they really mean it, because Britain, France, Germany, Norway, Denmark, even the Netherlands, Poland, Finland, they know. And of course the Baltics, they're the critical ones. They know that it's got to be done, because they know, as my friend, the retired general, it was a private conversation, so I won't name it, put it absolutely beautifully. The main thrust, if you're going to use ground forces at all into Europe, comes through Ukraine more than Belarus. And when you've got 1.5 million under arms, as Putin has, it is very, very difficult to tell them to go home and we're the peace party after all. Unfortunately, we have seen time and again, look at Saddam Hussein, this kind of aggression has its own peculiar and bizarre and really very frightening logic. That, once you've got it, you can't send them back home. Putin goes. If he suddenly says, I'm the party of peace and let's have democracy and make the Duma really work and I really believe in justice and the courts, not going to happen. And I think the Europeans now realise that. Whereas you get the contrast with Trumpland. Trumpland sees this as a business partner.
Yes, and let's talk about the matter in hand at the moment, which is the prospect of any ceasefire. It is extraordinary when we're considering what's been said this week about the proposals for the ceasefire in the Black Sea, that Ukraine would be prepared for it there in that one key area where they've beaten Russia. How much has this supremacy of the Black Sea hurt Russia economically?
I think very badly, but it's also hurt their prestige, because Putin has always proclaimed in his pronouncement when he's doing a strategic roundup, and we've talked, I've been a bit of a bore about it on this, about his obsession with the Arctic. The Arctic is part of the package in that he would like Russia to be seen as a great power, the great European power, peculiarly, the great European power, because it's the bridge between Europe and Asia. But he sees it as a global maritime power. Well, the trouble is it's been smacked on the nose, if you can smack a maritime on the nose, in the Navy in the Black Sea by a power that doesn't really have a Navy to speak of. And this is a big setback. And they do want to get their agricultural produce out. They do want to get the grain and the fertilizer out. Why? Because it connects them to the south. And that is where Russia has been losing prestige very, very badly to the countries of the south, and it wants to be its natural allies, particularly in Africa, but they can't get it out. And it's very peculiar that also, because I alluded to it earlier, that they want to be restored to the SWIFT clearance mechanism in international banking, particularly to one of the agricultural banks, which actually has got nothing to do with farming, but it happens to be particularly close to the personal fortunes of Vladimir Putin himself. So that this has hurt them badly, being shut out of so much of the international banking world. And it's a very, very big one. I think the Europeans are aware of this. I think that we're not at all sure what Trump sees with this. But I fear that this is really the bargaining chip. This is what Putin would really like from this. But I don't think he's serious about a short-term ceasefire at all. He wants, as the summer comes on, he wants to gather momentum, particularly for his heavy armored forces.
How likely do you think this ceasefire is at the moment then?
Less than 50-50.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, can we just talk just briefly if it does? I know we're in the realms of dreaming perhaps. If it does, who monitors it and who calls out any violations?
Well, there's something rather peculiar in view of the way they've behaved hitherto in the last few months, in that Putin seems to be saying, yeah, if it's going to be regulated, it's got to be regulated by the UN. This makes a lot of sense because anyway, if you're going to do a peace monitoring, reassurance, peacekeeping, which they're not talking about, but we're talking about a peace monitoring. It's the difference between what's known as Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 under the UN Charter. It has to work to UN regulations. Tony Blair, in his famous pronouncements about humanitarian intervention, also acknowledged that. So that is quite something. So, how would the UN set up a mandate for this? I think that the UN, there would have to be serious brokerage between Russia, China, and the other three permanent members of the UN as to how it would be done. But it looks as if it is going to be down to Britain, France, and Germany. But I cannot see them allowing a force that would sit inside Ukraine itself. Just let me go on with this, that they will do the surveillance electronically, aerial, satellites, overflights, and so on, with the reassurance force gathering and being ready to do things on the borders. I cannot see them going up, into, to the line of contact. Mind you, it's a very big line of contact too.
But in that light, if it were to be starting as a ceasefire in the Black Sea, how would that be monitored? And would that be perhaps more of would it be a simpler proposition or not?
I think it'd be very, very difficult indeed, because you would have to have in international waters maritime patrol. Now, how you do that is going to be very difficult. They would have to have all the littoral powers involved. Think of that. You would have to have Turkey. You would have to have the seemingly independent Georgia, Romania, even Bulgaria, as well as Georgia and Russia. I was about to say a dog's breakfast, so I will. It will be as an agreed supervised monitoring force. I think it's going to be almost impossible.
Just to get your perspective, we were talking earlier, and you were saying this is kind of a divergence point between between European countries and America, which centres in on the attitudes towards the future of Ukraine and protecting it. Just wanted to get your thoughts again from that interview with Tucker Carlson. Steve Witkoff, the US's special envoy, explaining things and saying things like he doesn't see Putin as a bad guy and he wants to establish trust, good feelings. He's joining really very much the US administration, or those high up in the administration who have repeated Kremlin lines. Do you think that they have been taken in by Russian propaganda, or do you think they're actually just saying what suits them to get where they want to be in negotiations?
It's very interesting. I think there's something a lot more going on there. There's a visceral dislike of Europe. The kind of loose talk that you got, that it's pathetic how the Europeans rely on that exchange between J.D. Vance and I think it was Waltz, um, in the infamous discussion about the Houthis. I think this is absolutely so, because of something I've alluded to earlier, the infantilizing of language. That they think that these are a bunch of sophisticated toffs who have lived off us, which we have, to a certain extent. And I don't think that this goes away. And I think that they will find certain people in the American establishment, including the military establishment, who are quite Europhile, that they speak French, that they are very proud of their Irish roots. Quite a number of them think Jake Sullivan, think of a general like Wes Clark, whom I knew very well. They've all been Rhodes Scholars. Now that is anathema to J.D. Vance, the hillbilly blues. Not that he is a hillbilly, far from it. He was alluding to his grandfather there. But there is this very, very strange dislike going on at the moment, and there's a lot of confusion. And the dog that hasn't barked in all of this is China, of course. China, of course, is set from the reversal of fortunes, the buddying up to Russia, would seem to be favored. It seems to be the confusion goes China's way. But I think there's so much preoccupation there, particularly with the way the economy is going, the problems of the aging society, and so on, that they're keeping very, very quiet at the moment. But I do think China's voice and what it decides to do in the second half of this year is going to be absolutely decisive.
There was a very bleak assessment that was given to Frontline this week by a former speechwriter for Putin. He said that the dynamic between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is underpinned by Putin seeing Trump as his ticket to reinvent himself on the global stage, an opportunity to change track from sort of a Tsarist track he was on as a cul-de-sac. And he's offering incentives to him, like siding with the US over Iran and offering to forfeit interests in places like Africa. Do you agree?
I think this is very interesting. I think Putin would be reluctant to give up Africa, but the synergy between the two, they see themselves as having entwined destinies, as it were. I'm not entirely sure that they really like each other. This is the view that I get very strongly from Fiona Hill of Brookings, who's one of the senior adjudicators of the Defense Review, very, very experienced at American-Russian relations. Because Fiona's view, and I don't think it's changed, is they both actually think they'd like to think that they're smarter than the other one, and that they're playing them. But for Putin, given the state of the society, terrible state, aging, health, and so on, and the economy, yes, Trump does provide an escape route, but that leaves a difference in the way the two will see or do see Europe. Trump and people around him, we've named the usual suspects, from Rubio even through, just it's full of limeys and French and the things and whatever. Do not see Europe as vital, although they know, given the economy, look what's happening with the motor industry. They will prove vital. But Putin has never lost any illusion about that. Putin really wants to get on side. He wants to be a partner again. I think if we could go back to the 1990s and the Foundation Act and the Atlantic Russia Council, the bridge between NATO and Russia could be made to work, and he would want it to be made to work to Russia's advantage, if I'm not being too obscure. He just doesn't want to go in as a supplicant and a sucker. But it is really important. And I think it's really important that the Trump administration doesn't quite appreciate at the moment.
How do you think Europe and the coalition of the willing should respond to what they have learned this week?
I wish the coalition of the willing could actually get into room 101, the dustbin, the expression, the coalition of the willing.
Apologies for using it.
Because it's a coalition of consensus marked by the steady marking of marching and marking time of cold feet. Because whenever you say, who are you going to put on the ground? The Brits are going to put troops on the ground that they don't have. The French would put troops on the ground, which they certainly do have. Germany is sort of willing, and everybody else says, well, yeah, it's a good idea, but it's balmy. I paraphrase Giorgia Meloni of Italy. I think that they have got to find a more practical way of sorting this out and doing the business. And I don't think it should be done at grandstand level. That's why I'm surprised that yet again another Starmer Macron grin and grip on the steps of the Elysee. It shouldn't be done by that. And I think it's where you listen to the councils of the smaller players who are very capable. A lot of the diplomatic muscle being put in by the Baltics, for example, is terrific at the moment. The Norwegians are very good, and they should be going through the contingencies from top to bottom. What happens if Ukraine collapses militarily? What happens if Trump gives in and signs a buddy-buddy agreement with Putin? Where does that leave us? What I'm impressed by what's coming through from the spin from all these events, the grin and grip meetings, the chiefs of defence meeting at Northwood and so on, is I'm getting no flavour of it at all of the big thinking behind it. And there has to be some really big thought. How many forces have you got? What are the rules of engagement going to be? What happens in the very, very worst case? What happens if, in the way that we've set things up at the moment, that awful expression, we have to look at strategic failure, which we're very poor at assessing, by the way, because once you look at that, then you can work out alternatives and remedies. I'm not getting that too much at the moment.
You mentioned earlier Trump's desire for the Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to be the president who ends wars, and Putin will only want to do so if he can present it as a win to Russia. Otherwise, everyone else will be asking, what on earth was this for? Why did 250,000 Russians die on the battlefield? I mean, what will convince them, and what do each of them see as a win, do you think?
I think that their conception of a win is the two are poles apart on that. I think the thing that is so ominous for Trump is his concentration span. Look at the way things are going in the Middle East, because there we have Netanyahu clamping down on so many of the channels of democracy to go for a big fight, and a big fight in Gaza, which will obviously, in terms of blood, just have horrible consequences and will not look good as an ally, theoretically devoted to the credentials of the democratic and liberal world. It doesn't work. Trump is not going to solve that one. That's what I'm saying, in any time soon. And also, I think there is a problem. Why on earth did they die? I think that kind of question is the problem. I think we are underestimating it. It does not have a potential for World War III in the way that you could do it in a tabloid headline, but it has a potential for a terrible bloody mess. Look at the confusion over nuclear engagement and how the Russians particularly are nudging the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons closer to reality and practicality, almost in every pronouncement that they make on this subject, plus deploying nuclear capable forces very far forward, especially in Belarus.
I'm just curious to know that as a defence editor at the Evening Standard, of all the leaders or participants currently involved in trying to bring the war in Ukraine to an end, who would you like most to interview, and what would you ask them?
I'd like to interview a raft of them. I would actually,
Of course.
I would love to interview Chris Cavoli. Very adroit, very capable Supreme Allied Commander, American forces in Europe. And of course, wouldn't we all? I'd like to have a long conversation, because I think she's got a lot of miles in there. Kaya Keisha,
Kai Kellis.
She sounds to me, of all of them, a bit like somebody who's got a grip on what the future may be looking like.
And what would you ask her?
I'd ask her, what are you going to do with the coalition of the willing? Don't you want a gang of the truly functional?
Robert Fox, great to speak to you. Thank you very much for your time. You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news, or read it on thetimes.com.